right, welcome to the next episode of the Agile MSP podcast. Today I'm joined by Mike Burrows, someone whose work.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome, Mike. And came across him recently. He's authored 5 books, and his work has impacted hundreds or probably thousands of teams around agile, agility, change, leadership, so many other things. And he's written several books. There's Agendashift, and then he's just launched a new book just a couple of weeks ago, as of April 2025 here, called Wholehearted, and engaging with complexity in the deliberately adaptive organization. So that's a mouthful, but I look forward to hearing more about that here with Mike. So yeah, and for MSPs, Agile often feels like something tech teams do, developers do. So it feels overwhelming to take on. I think his door really makes it more human, practical, powerful, so people want to lean into it. It's not about the tools. So if you're overwhelmed by tickets and projects, or just getting buy-in with your team, just don't really like that word of buy-in, but this is the place to start. So again, welcome.
Thank you. That was a really good introduction, actually. I mean, the word humane I use quite a lot, actually, certainly in my first book. And people have said it about some of the other stuff I've done. So yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that.
Yeah, it's really, again, I've started multiple technology businesses, but yeah, as I go along, I'm realizing more and more it's all about people.
Yeah. Organizations are made of people, and we forget about that. We think it's its process or its structure, but ultimately they're made by people. And the process and structure are just designed to help that to work as effectively as it can. And if you make it work for people, then those people have the opportunity to contribute something.
Yeah, and that's actually in our organized group of companies. We follow this paradigm from, I think it's from Simon Sinek is where it came from, and he has the concept of just cause, and we have that as just 2 words: unlock potential.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. Yep. That's about in teams, in companies, in individuals. There's just so much there.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess before we dig into frameworks or books and stuff, like how did you get into all of this? Lean, agile. What was your entry point? Like what? What's a moment that got what sucked you in? I guess.
Yeah. Well, I'm old enough that I'll make it a short story rather than a long story. But I started in what you could say deeply techie stuff, embedded systems, aircraft simulation. I then got into software tools, again, quite cutting edge software tools, and it was quite advanced technology for its time. And then quite a career change that took me into banking, and 10 years in banking and rising through the ranks in a couple of investment banks. I was an executive director at UBS in fixed income securities, of all places, at the time of the credit crisis. So I spent quite a long time battling through that. And when I sort of fell out at the end of all of that, it was into a CTO role at a late stage startup. So very different scale. The whole organization was smaller than the global department that I'd previously run. So very, very different scale. But what I didn't know at the time while I was doing that work, it was going to be the case study for my first book. I was doing Kanban at the time. It was still early days for Kanban, actually. At least, it wasn't quite as mainstream and accepted as it was. People were still arguing, is it, Kanban versus Scrum, rather than realizing how well they go together, for example.
Yeah.
But I was quite active on the mailing lists, and I then wrote a blog post. It was for the New Year's holiday, New Year's holiday of 2013. I wrote a blog post introducing Kanban through its values, and the blog post went absolutely mental. You talk about things being humane. Kanban was getting a reputation of being just for the tool heads, for people who cared about metrics and probability distributions and all these kinds of things. And I took the principles and practices as they were then documented and abstracted a model of values out of them: transparency, balance, collaboration, those kinds of things. So that blog post went absolutely wild. I've never written a blog post since that's done as well. And eventually, a year and a bit later, that became my first book, Kanban from the Inside. And that was really career changing for me. I became a trainer, consultant, and now 5-time author. So so that's how I ended up here. Yeah.
Okay, love it. Okay. So, yeah, obviously, I talk to hundreds of these IT service providers, MSPs, we call it in our space.
Yep.
And they're intrigued by Kanban and Agile. They're seeing other spaces doing it, but it feels overwhelming because there's
Yes.
like all these books. And obviously, I recommend books. You see them on the back of my wall
Yes.
here, Phoenix Project and
Yes.
The Goal and stuff. But it can feel overwhelming, out of reach. And they're like, well, let's just wait for next quarter.
Yeah.
So I guess you've probably seen a lot of teams wrestle with that.
Yes.
So what's an insight around helping them navigate that?
Like I could do like the insight as of Kanban from the inside, 11, 12 years ago, and the insight of as of today and the new book and so on, and they're actually very compatible. I've just developed better understanding of how to explain these things in a way that's not just about process and tools, but it's a bit more sort of organizational, as you could say. And if you go to the basics of it, we don't want people that are overwhelmed with crazy amounts of work, with project plans that commit you for so long you can't make any change, you can't be responsive. Different parts of the organization are completely seized up because everything's already been agreed, far too far in advance and so on. So at the level both of the individual person doing the work and at the level of teams of teams, whole organization and so on, it's overburdened and overcommitted. And both of those problems are things that you can do something about. And in fact, the problem of overcommitment, which is the one that people at the front line is what overburden. Sorry, this is what the people at the front line feel all the time. Trying to do too many things at once, too much contract switching, doing too much of fixing up things we only half did. All these kinds of the direct problem of overburden and all the induced problems that happen as a result of it is actually quite straightforward to deal with. In the end, you've got to decide what it is you're going to finish. You've got to decide what are the few things that I can afford to work on and finish before I worry about those other things. That is a basic practice of personal productivity, but you can then extend that to the team. What as a team should we be focusing on? What is the absolute goal that we really want to achieve, today, tomorrow, this week, and how we're going to work together to achieve that? And that idea is baked in different ways, is baked into all of the Agile frameworks. In Kanban, it's about limiting work in progress. In Scrum, it's about limiting how much you commit to, sprint by sprint, whether it's week by week or fortnight by fortnight. And it's also about making sure the teams are self-organizing around the goals that they are trying to achieve. So all these are different ways of achieving the same thing. And the cool thing about it is they actually help each other. If you don't plan too far ahead, if you don't overcommit, it's much easier also to manage your workload at a day-to-day level as well. And when you start to manage your workload at a day-to-day level, that gives you more capacity to notice what's happening around you, to make better decisions, to communicate better, and so on. And that then enables the self-organizing, the innovation, all those kinds of things as well. So there really is a kind of a virtuous circle going on here. And the better you manage you can manage yourself, the better the team can manage itself, the less that is a burden on the organization around it as well. So that, again, is freeing up that decision-making and communication capacity. And who knows what the organization could do with it if it had more of that, Yeah. So that's when things start to get exciting. And so you can frame that in terms of the tools, in terms of Kanban, in terms of Scrum, in terms of stand-up meetings, boards, tickets, stickies, all these different things. But you can think about it a little bit more organizationally, a little bit more abstractly, is what is the work that we've got? What's in front of us? How do we coordinate between us and over the shared resources that we might otherwise be competing over? How do we manage our dependencies, those kind of things? And also, what is it that we are committed to? And how do we decide what are the things that we are focused on, we're organizing around? How do we make sure that we're making good progress in the direction that we want to achieve? Everything I've described there works whether you're talking at personal level, team of teams level, or the whole organization even. And when you understand that, that's the key then to unlocking how things scale up, and not by making the process bigger and more complicated, which unfortunately is the way a lot of the Agile community has gone in the last 20 years, by understanding how do we make those relationships more healthy. Relationships between how we coordinate and how we work more healthy. Relationships with that and how we organize, how we strategize, how we govern ourselves. Relationships between scales of organization and so on. And the new book is unlocking all of that, and it's sort of mining several decades worth of organizational theory, but presenting it in a really fresh and easy to engage with way. And it needs to be easy to engage with so that people can actually have conversations about it, talk about this stuff, how we're going to make things better for ourselves. So that's like 10 years worth compressed into a couple of minutes. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, so somebody's saying, "Oh, we're too busy. We got our quarterly rocks, and we got to get these done."
Yeah.
That's actually more reason to get into it.
Yes.
Obviously, I'm a fan of like Traction EOS. Like I got the book cover on the back here, and it says, "Hey, focus. Just a couple rocks every quarter." And so people do that. Say, "Hey, we're going to pause these other things." But I think they still fill their day. They're still overburdened. So they've got their one or two rocks individually, and then but the pebbles and the stones are still crammed around it.
Yes.
And that's not the intention. They're still overburdened. They're just
yes. I think there's lots, not unreasonably. There's a lot of focus on process over the last 20 years, and it perhaps is to the exclusion of other things that are also important. I think I make this distinction between overburdened and overcommitted. And overburden you can deal with bottom up as a practice thing. But overcommitment, that is, people are making strategic decisions about what we are committed to. And it helps if the team is involved in those decisions. It helps if there's participation between different levels of organization. It's not just a cascade of OKRs down the organization, but there's actually some real meaningful conversations. But still, if you're committing to too much, that has an effect, and it's not just that you're biting off more than you can chew. Is that it kind of makes the whole organization too rigid. Everyone is so committed to the things that they're committed to that if it turns out you need something from somebody, you can't get it done, and then you just get killed by your dependencies. And then the chances that the organization will respond swiftly when something it didn't expect happens, those are greatly diminished as well. So it's worth keeping these two problems, overburden and overcommitment, in mind, and start to learn to see them and see what you can do about them.
Yeah, I remember reading the Phoenix Project. Talks about, I think it's like Little's Law. Like the more you got in progress, the bigger your backlogs are, and your response time, like linearly, expands. Takes forever.
Yes. I mean, it's worse than linear. I mean, the maths will tell you that it's linear, but what the maths doesn't tell you is that when you've got more things going on than you can cope with, then your quality goes down. And the world is changing around you as well, So the rework piles on the actual work, and it makes things non-linearly worse.
Yeah.
And if you look at the advanced queuing theory, which my background is in maths, so I'm allowed to. I don't recommend that most people do, but Little's law tells you that on average, that it will grow with, the more burdened you are, the more work in progress you have, then the longer things will take on average. And I think most people can understand it.
Yeah.
But also your responsiveness in terms of the profile of it, how predictable you are, that just completely falls apart when you're overburdened. Your predictability goes out the window. Yeah. It's not just average. It's not just bad on average. You start to have these incredibly long wait times. For some things, maybe you can get some things done, but other things, then the performance for those is just abysmal. And we'll see what happens when a system grinds to a halt. It really grinds to a halt, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I see that personally. Is I take on all these things and start it, and then not responsive to my team because I got all my projects and my calendar is full, and then you just can't get through the emails and the quick responses.
Yes. I mean, I talk about these decision-making capacity and communication capacity, and you have to treat those as really precious things. And as soon as everybody's maxed out, those capacities are no longer there.
Yeah.
And your ability for the organization to be in any way responsive has completely disappeared. You can't claim to be an agile organization or to have business agility if people are, up to the eyeballs and not actually able to respond to anything. That doesn't mean we don't want people, working. We don't want, people. We don't want people sitting on their hands. But are overcommitted and forced to work on too many things at once, that has a really negative effect on organizational performance. And
Yeah.
however you define agility, any reasonable definition of agility goes out the window, once those problems are widespread.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I would say 80% is the real max capacity.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And people will find things to do, useful things to do with that other 20%. I mean, just don't obsess
Oh,
about
yeah.
it. Yes.
Automation, documentation,
Yeah.
creating process where required, being
Getting to
creative.
know their customers. Why not do that?
Yeah.
Radical
Going
idea.
the extra mile. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What happened to going the extra mile? But if we're at 100%, we can't. We need, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, you talk about outcomes versus process and outputs.
Yes.
So what does that look like when a team starts
Yeah.
making that
So,
decision?
I've written 5 books. So kind of the middle two, or the middle. Well, it depends on how you count them, actually. But Agendashift and Organizing Conversations. They're about the conversations you have if you want to explore not just the work that we need to do, but actually what's the consequence of it. So we're talking outcomes. And we're talking outcomes in some meaningful sense, not 5% more, 10% less kinds of outcomes, but needs met for people in some way, helping people make progress. And this is what in the product world, the jobs to be done crowd talk about, people being able to make progress out of their struggles. And it's really good to be able to explore. We talk about what problem are you trying to solve, but really want to understand what are people struggling with, what would meaningful progress look like, what could we deliver them today or tomorrow that will help them make some real progress, and what could we follow that up with on the day after, and so on. And we go on a journey with our customers, helping them make progress. And how you describe that progress, that is outcomes and job stories and those kinds of things. And I've written 2 books worth on how do you have better conversations about those things. And they turn out to be, effectively strategy conversations. If you start to articulate what it is we really want, or what it is the customer really wants, and what it would be like if we could make all this to happen, without actually designing anything, just imagining what it could be like when it's working at its ideal best for everyone. What's that like? And that's a really cool conversation, an energizing conversation. What stops that? What gets in the way? You think about obstacles. And then what would you like to have happen? Then what happens? Then what happens? Then what happens? I mean, I'm just using a small selection of the repertoire of questions that you can use. But you're going from ideal to obstacles to outcomes, and you've got outcomes at small outcomes, things that we might achieve tomorrow. You've got longer term outcomes that you might achieve a quarter from now, a year from now, or whatever. And because of how we've created them, they are related to each other. And you are actually starting to think strategically. Where do we want to apply ourselves today? What commitments do we want to make if we want to get to there and there? Not that we think it's just a linear thing. I mean, we haven't necessarily designed anything. We haven't actually designed any solutions. But what kind of outcomes should we be working on that take us in the right kind of direction? And it's all about keeping that moving in that direction, getting a sense of momentum and so on, and a sense of knowing whether you're winning or not. And that's important, because it's very easy to be busy without actually succeeding.
Oh yes.
And you want a sense that you're actually going somewhere useful. And in both books, we're talking about strategy conversations. We're talking leadership development as well. How to have better conversations in your teams, how to better conversations around you, focused on really what we're trying to achieve. And then what you do, you're giving people that have the expertise, to have the opportunity to innovate, to go and do that, because you don't have to be prescriptive about what we're going to do. Don't have a detailed plan that's going to fall apart the moment it makes contact with reality. We've got some goals, we've got some objectives, we've got some things to work toward. And if there's a shared understanding of those, and enough people are working in enough places, coherently working together to achieve some of those goals, amazing things can happen. Progress on a broad front to achieve a goal that we all share. That's a cool thing to be able to have. And when you think only in terms of solutions, you don't really get that. You get into rollout mentality, or if we just build this solution, then everything's going to be great. And of course, we all know that it rarely works out that way.
Yep. I see. That's been my tendency historically, is to jump into solutions and tactics and code and go find a PowerShell script or Python script or something. But I'm working with my coaches. My coaches are pushing me. No, Wim, you got to be outcome oriented, because it's like a monkey on your shoulder. It's a burden as a leader to have to solve all the problems.
Yeah, I've been there. I've been a developer. And I know you tend to think you understand the world through the code. In the end, it's an easy trap to fall into. I can remember when I was responsible for a huge trading system in a bank. Talking many tens of. Well, I don't know how many lines of code it was. But many thousands, obviously. And I used to think that defined the system. And then you go down to the trading floor and you see all the post-it notes around the screens of the traders. And you realise that the system, the technical system, only does half of what they actually need, and the system has no insight at all into the phone conversations that happen, and the chat conversations that happen, and the shouts across the trading floor, and all the rest of the system. The technical system is sitting in the middle of something much bigger and much more complex that the technology will never fully understand, and it's changing every day, and all the rest of it. So it's important that we're a little bit humble about it, and the only way you're going to understand really that system is to spend some time in it with people and so on. I think back to that job. I don't think it was actually my idea, so I'm not taking credit for it. But I ran this global department, and we had every permanent member of staff spend 2 weeks on the trading floor. That was an incredible investment from the business side. It was quite an investment from ours, but they were so looked after. They were so respected. They spent real time investing in explaining how things really worked, as opposed to how we thought things worked. But there was a real exchange of learning on both ways. Obviously, we understood the system better than anybody else, and we could teach them things they hadn't thought of. But we came away with a much deeper appreciation of how things really were. It did great things for our relationship.
I just as top left here, obviously we sell the software and such, but we use it ourselves, and we do training for clients, and we participate in that because we're learning. We're on the journey with everyone else, and nobody's ever reached it. There's always some other habit and to implement, and another mindset, and more things to learn, like we're going through today.
Yes. You won't have imagined all the ways that your software will be used and all the contexts it will be used in, and somebody will be doing something amazing with it that you hadn't even thought of, and that's cool. Somebody else will be struggling in a way that you hadn't thought of either, and again, in both cases, there's an opportunity there for learning.
It's huge. Okay, so you talk about inviting people into change, just engaging them that way, and rather than top-down mandates.
Yes.
So how does that work better? Maybe you've got a story around that, or you've worked with a team.
Well, the idea is, I'll give you an idea of, style of conversation, style of questioning already. What in the end, as I said already, you are looking to make progress on a broad front. You're going to need different people trying different things, and you need them, actually motivated to do that. And the more that the strategy. And when I say strategy here, I'm talking about those outcomes and the relationships between outcomes, the kind of obstacles that we need to overcome, and so on. Not at the level of solutions. That strategy, the more it is articulated in their own words, the more they are engaged with it. So it's a matter of getting the right people into the room, and the right people are anyone who's got something to contribute. And I've done, small exercises just with teams. I've done whole company exercises where, we've hired a big room, and we've got lots of people on, tables, in this big room, and we're having these kinds of conversations, and people are putting into words what they would like things to be like, how things could be, how we could make things better for ourselves, for our customers, whatever. putting into their own words what kind of outcomes they think they could realize and what they themselves are motivated to work towards. And after that, it's a matter of giving people the time and the space to actually do those things, and the feedback loops to make sure that it's actually happening, that things are pulling together in the way that you hope, and so on. So yeah, it's not always about improving the process or the organization. Sometimes it starts with a customer. We've had customers in the room for some of these conversations as well. I talk about inside out and outside in strategy. And in the end, you need a bit of both. You need to be doing both, and they need to connect in the middle, somehow, so that you're, speaking to what customers actually need, and you're also developing the capabilities that you need internally, and seeing that as you work on one, that creates opportunities for the other. Again, there's a possibility of a virtuous circle there.
Yeah, it's a good segue into I like that you're bringing in the customer. Obviously, you have the book on going right to left.
Yes.
So obviously our company name is Top Left because it's all about the work comes top left on the Kanban and it flows through.
Yes.
But it's a real internal focus. How do we triage and prioritize internally?
Yes.
But I really love what you mentioned, the focus on the work coming out.
Yes.
And how do we work backwards so it's high quality and a good experience?
Yeah. So right to left, working backwards from key moments of impact and learning. I mean, that's a bit jargony, but to explain it, if we had a definition of done that was someone's need was met. I used to argue that's the only definition of done you ever need. Obviously, it's a bit tongue in cheek. It teases, and it's deliberate, and it's making a point. It annoys a small fraction of people, and I think it's actually worth it for the point that it makes. But then I realise you do need a definition of really done as well, and that's we've accounted for the learning. And so, I'm placing myself. I'm sort of thinking back to actual teams that I've worked with, that I've been a part of. I was delivery manager on 2 government digital exemplar projects in the UK at a time when government digital was a really cool place to work. I mean, it may still be now, but it certainly was then. It was a time where people were very excited about going from those really old systems that were horrible to use to systems that really took user needs very, very seriously, and it was baked into the process that we would. But every day, in your stand-up meetings, for example, you are thinking about what's it going to be like for the customer when we get this right. And we're working backwards from that. So that's working backwards from the impact. And then there's the fact that the sticky notes stay onto the board until we've actually, after completion, until we've had a chance to properly reflect on the process of delivering them, and also on whether they actually did make the impact that we hope they would, and so on and so on. So that's working backwards from the learning. If those things are in your face every day, and that next week or in a couple of weeks' time, there's going to be that meeting where you go through them. That changes to your attitude to the work. If you know that there's going to be some accounting to be done there, we're accounting for the learning. That changes the way that you work. I mean, this is something that's been known a very long time. The organizational psychologists talk about containers. I mean, it's a bit of jargon I never really understood. But when you put those boundaries there, we've got this 2-week period until the next learning meeting, till the next retrospective, and we're working all the time to make that impact as well. We're creating some boundaries that we're in a way not going beyond, and our work is in that container, and we're doing everything we can to amplify the fact that we are aiming to meet user needs to actually make a real difference for people, and amplifying the fact that we're getting better and better at this, and we're getting better and better at understanding what the customer actually needs. When you get that right, it is truly awesome. It's a privilege to work in a team that's working in that kind of way, and that was genuinely my experience in government digital. An experience I didn't expect, but was really delighted to have. So that's right to left, working backwards from key moments of impact and learning.
Yeah, and that applies for all kinds of work, whether it's marketing. There's sales. In our space, it's like help desk
tickets. Yeah.
Maybe not every single ticket, but I guess having the weekly, bi-weekly meeting and reviewing it. What are they learning? Did we actually deliver what they wanted, what they needed, which they may not have said, but what did they need?
Yes. Oh, I should say, it also goes back to what I said earlier. I said, decide what you're going to finish. It's all part of, whether you're using tools like work in progress limits or sprints or whatever. The more you can focus the conversation at the beginning of a stand-up meeting on the things that have just completed and maybe there's something still to talk about them, and the things that you can get over the line, the less you are trying to squeeze new work into the process. Now, if you're using Kanban, if you are visualizing your work, we're talking about reviewing the items on the right-hand side of the board, then in the column just before that, and then so on, working our way backwards. And if you get to like the backlog columns of the board, and you know that everyone's going to be busy until we next meet, well, do you need to even talk about the backlog? Perhaps you don't. So it's a very standard practice in the Kanban world, and it applies. Whether or not you're using Kanban, I mean, you can change the way you organize your meeting minutes, for example, or your meeting agendas. Make sure you focus on the things closest to completion first, or closest to the customer first, or some combination. For big meetings, sometimes you need like a 2-level structure, but it's a really effective technique. I can think of meetings, from 10 or 20 years ago where I did it the wrong way around, and I would turn the meeting minutes upside down if I had my time machine. If I could do that again, because I, as the manager, was actually starting with the work that was in the backlog and creating a pressure to start things that I really shouldn't have been applying. I should have been much more interested in the things that had just finished. Not that I wasn't interested in them, but the reports that we drove our conversations off was unhelpful in that way.
Yep. Yeah, and that's I see, because I'm a visionary, and so I love what's next. But that just creates more pressure and overwhelm, overburden, overcommitment, all those things. So focus on getting the feature done, out, and people using it and getting feedback.
I'm similar. I'm always on to the next thing. I forget to celebrate the thing we've done, and then we're already on to the next thing. And in my head, I'm on to the thing behind that as well. Start from the right. Start from the things recently finished. There's things to celebrate there, and the things to learn immediately. Before we get to the retrospective. When we think something's done, it doesn't always stay done. And sometimes it's good to know. We're talking about rolling out something to production, for example. It's good to know how it's performing, how many people are using it. Those basic things. Even the morning after, the day before, and then the things that we can get over the line. That's where you get the most bang for your buck. If for a few hours' work you can get something out there, that's worth something. Doing a few hours work to get something into the next column on the board, well, you haven't really achieved anything half so interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so I know you're itching to talk about the new book, so I'd love to hear more about that, Wholehearted, and then to see how we can make this, how it applies to our clients.
Yes.
Our space.
So it's everything we've been talking about, writ large, really. I talked already about we want healthy relationships between different aspects of how our team works, in terms of how we do the work, how we coordinate, how we organize. And that idea, as I've said already, translates to every level of the organization, every possible scale. And you can think about in terms of, are these relationships healthy and productive? And those sort of coaching or workshopy style conversations that I talked about, you can have those conversations around healthy and productive relationships. Healthy and productive relationships between teams, peer teams, for example, in a process, between different levels of scale in the organization, and between more abstract things, like, as I said, between how you do the work, how you coordinate, how you organize, how you strategize, how you govern yourselves, and so on. And there's a really cool model from the 1970s called the viable system model that very few people totally understand. It's, I think, slightly arrogant of me, given how much study has gone into it over the decades. But I think it's ripe for being represented in a much more engaging way, and in a way that's actually also much more suitable to the digital age organization as well. the traditional picture is a picture with lots of boxes, lots of lines, lots of nesting, lots of crossing lines, and things, very, very tangled thing. And I show it just a small piece at a time. Let's focus on 2 or 3 bits and the relationships between them. And let's have a serious conversation about whether these are working well together. When these are working at their ideal best for us, what would that be like? That is the conversation starter for something interesting for the organization. Many organizational dysfunctions can be explained in terms of unhealthy, unproductive, unbalanced relationships of these different kinds, between people, between teams, between aspects of the organization. It's a well-tested, very well-respected model, and I'm making it accessible to practitioners, to managers, particularly in digital type organizations, but not exclusively. I'm actually getting some interest from universities even, which is quite cool. But then they're certainly not my primary audience. It's making sure that all the work that I've done previously in my previous books, that it actually stacks up against the theory without going overboard into the theory itself. It just walks you through the process and gives you enough insight for you to start to internalize in a very intuitive way what the theory is actually saying. There are there's some crazy maths, some information theory, and all the rest of it behind this, but for 90% of the work of that maths can be done with the idea of healthy and productive relationships.
Yeah.
And relationships that change over time. Obviously we all like to talk about things being complex now. Things co-evolve. You change one thing, it has an effect on other things, and you don't always know how it's going to work, and all these kinds of things. And writing in 2025 rather than the 1975 when this stuff first came out, we have a much better handle on these things than we did then. So I'm very excited about this book. This is the passion project of all my books, and I'm very pleased with the kind of response that it's getting, I've said this before about outcomes. I'll say this again about Wholehearted, and they overlap hugely. This is what the rest of my career looks like. It's this stuff, I'm not going to be a delivery manager again. Kind of been there, done that. I'm not going to be a Kanban trainer again. Been there, done that. But getting people to appreciate their organizations, all that's good about it, all that's less good about it, and about the things that are less good about it, help them understand what's really happening, so that it can actually do something about it. It's meant to be empowering to people. Give people the tools that they need, have better conversations in the organization, have more people in organizations understand how things work, how things go wrong, how dysfunctions arise, what you can do about them, and so on. And it goes so much further than process improvement. I mean, process improvement is important, and so many of my books are focused on it. But there's an organizational dimension to it all that I think gets overlooked. And whenever you have a kind of a problem that you feel, well, it doesn't feel like it's in my power to solve, that's probably not a process problem so much as an organizational one. And you need to work out, well, what actually is going on, what relationships are involved, who else do I need to be talking to, and so on. And this book will help you do that.
Yeah. Love it. And yeah, I've seen organizations following Kanban, following Agile, or let's say a Scrum, right? They've done Scrum Master training, but they really never figured out this people component, emotional intelligence.
Yes.
And it holds the organization back. So I've signed up clients, or they say I'm a Scrum Master, but they actually don't know how to implement or shift culture.
Yes.
It's a problem. Just a certification, right?
It's a problem in technology generally, actually. I mean, it's not. I mean, some teams make things difficult for themselves by identifying too strongly with a particular methodology, with Scrum or Kanban. We are a Scrum team and we're not going to look at Kanban, or vice versa. But actually, even technology teams, sometimes there's an arrogance to them. They rely so much on their technical competence So they actually that sometimes gets in the way of a healthy relationship with their customer or with other teams, and that's a problem I've seen a few times. If a bit of empathy goes a long way. And if
Mm.
another team works differently to you, well, maybe there's a reason for that. Your customer doesn't have your technology skills, but that doesn't mean they're stupid. And but you have the possibility of helping them make progress, and that actually is what makes your technology work meaningful. So get into that, enjoy that. And when technology teams look on others with disdain, that's a problem. When
Yeah.
they realize that they have the power to actually change things for people, that's exciting. Let's go for not the disdain, but the excitement, the meeting needs, making
Mm.
progress, achieving outcomes. Those are all really cool things. And we need teams that are organized around those. It's not just doing the work, but organized to achieve goals for other people. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if you see a couple of leaders, let's say a head of service, or somebody's managing a service team, somebody's managing a project team, and there's some dysfunction in their relationship, how would you tackle that?
I mean, step one is you've got to have a conversation somehow. And I've had this in the government digital space, for example. I saw other people actually addressing this problem, and I used the same playbook. I worked on a multi-supplier project, and it wasn't a good project. This was before the good ones that I did work on. And there was an off-the-record meeting between representatives of the three main suppliers involved, and they realised that so long as they were following official procedures and official change management protocols and everything else, they would never get anything done.
Mm.
And they actually needed to talk to each other. And what I recognise now that I perhaps didn't, 10, 15 years ago, that these are, we can all understand them as trust building conversations, building trust with the different suppliers. And what I know now, didn't understand 15 years ago, is that those trust building conversations are very necessary in any kind of organization. I keep coming back to decision making and communication capacity. The unfortunate, difficult truth is there's never enough of that to go around. There will always be times when the thinking side of the organization, strategy, and the doing side of the organization, delivery, operations, whatever you call it, even when they seem to be the same people, will misunderstand each other. There will be operational decisions made that go against the strategy, but
Mm.
unwittingly. There'll be strategic decisions made unwittingly that go against how things actually work and how people are actually deployed and how busy people are and what people are already committed to, and so on and so on and so on. You see that all the time. If leaders aren't invested in building trust, in making sure that the strategy side and the operational side open up to each other so that they can make the best decisions with the best possible context, then you won't get people making mistakes that are expensive to unwind. When there is a particular dysfunction between particular people, that is that's the seeds of mistrust, obviously.
Mm.
But anything that you can do to build trust between the groups that they represent, then that's got to be good. You may feel you don't want to get into a personal relationship, but maybe you can depersonalize the issue and focus on there being a healthy and productive relationship between the teams, whether it's a service relationship or an accountability relationship or whatever it might be.
Yep.
Yeah. And I've had practical experience of making that happen. I've had those off the record meetings. I've had a meeting that was going so badly. I said, "Let's stop. This is just killing us."
Yeah.
And we'll either thrash it out now or we'll thrash it out over a cup of coffee. And we decided that it'd be a few of us over a coffee. It made an amazing difference. People started being honest with each other and not trying to stitch the other side up all the time, which in multi-supplier situations is an easy thing to happen.
Yep. Okay. So are there any requirements to read the book? Or could I give it to any of my people and they could jump right into it?
All my books are designed to be read. I think the one book that's the most sort of specialist is Organizing Conversations. I mean, that's written for people with interest in organization development and leading and leadership. Wholehearted, I wouldn't necessarily give it to like a new joiner or something, but for anyone who's an interest in how organizations work, how their part of the organization fits into the wider organization, and how to make that work better. I mean, that's true even of a team lead, for example. Anyone who has any responsibility for developing other people, I think would benefit from reading the book. So I think in the end, many people in the organization actually would. Some of the other books, Kanban from the Inside, it's very obvious what that book is about.
Yeah.
Right to Left is a bit broader. That's aimed a bit more at leaders. It's the Digital Leader's Guide to Lean and Agile is the subtitle of that book. So that is aimed more at managers. The context for that book, I just got sick and tired of people describing Agile in terms of pushing from backlogs. People describe Scrum in terms of product backlog to sprint backlog to doing the work, to getting the work done, very left to right.
Yeah.
And without in any way going against the Scrum guide, you can describe Scrum in a very right to left way. And in the book, I'm as positive about Scrum as I am about Kanban. It's I've seen both work really well. And I think criticizing something that can work amazingly well is not a good place to start. Understand why it works well, and then get to why some people make such a mess of it.
Yeah.
And I think the whole left to right thing is a massive problem. I think every time people explain Agile in that kind of way, or explain Scrum in that kind of way, a fairy dies. It's just drip, drip, drip attrition undermining what Agile is about. And in some ways, you could say it's no wonder that it's in the mess that it's in at the moment. It's that kind of misunderstanding and that kind of forced rollout of something that's misunderstood. There's two sins in one there, and I think that explains the mess that Agile is in.
Yeah, there's a lot of false dichotomies of this versus that. And I'm like, no, you can take the best of both.
Yes, quite.
Right. That's why I love Scrum Band, is you just take the best parts of both.
If you that means understanding them first, or at least going with the spirit of them, or at least trying something and seeing what works. Just be a little bit humble about it, and see what happens. Yeah.
But I really love the focus on values and the principles, because that's what got me into this probably 25 years ago. I think I was like 18, 19, like a junior programmer in the company, and there was chaos there. They had no methodologies, no frameworks. It's like, go work on this and let's try launch it and whatever ASAP, right? And working overnight and everything. And so I remember reading, I can't remember one of the first books on it, what was out then, but there was a C2 wiki, I think.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I can't remember the guys behind that.
Kent Beck and Ron Jeffries. Yes. Yeah. I do that now in Wholehearted. I mean, it's not really an Agile book. I'm mining 5 decades worth of stuff, not just the last 2 decades worth of stuff. But obviously, Lean and Agile are a very important part of my background. And in chapter 1, I actually do go through the Agile Manifesto and see the correspondence between the kinds of things that I've been saying with what the manifesto says, and explaining also the historical change that we went through, from project-driven software delivery to agile style delivery, over that period, explaining it in those terms, in terms of values. It's a little bit more abstract, but you can color it with examples, and that makes it less abstract. But it's a great way of avoiding being prescriptive. Someone said to me last week, prescription is the refuge of the unserious, or prescription is for the unserious, or something like that. And it was a great line. Every context is different, and what worked for somebody else might not work for you. And try stuff, see what works, and try to develop a deeper understanding of why it works and why it doesn't work.
Yeah. Oh, I've been doing that everywhere living a life by design. You got to, research, like it's just like fitness and nutrition. You got to see what works.
Yes. What works in your context. Yeah.
Yeah. Very different. Yeah. Okay. With the Agile Manifesto, that came out 20 years ago, but I've been looking at that. How do I apply that? Because it's really focused on software development.
Yes.
And so I've used like AI and translated to come up with examples for other industries.
Yes.
But I think what you've done with the values, the principles behind it about the interactions of people and
Yes.
relationships, I
Yeah.
think that's way easier to apply than.
Well, you can think of it in terms of the model that I've been describing. So, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. That's the relationship between how we do the work and how we coordinate. And working software, you can think of, we are committed to deliver something that actually meets a need for the customer. And that's the organizing bit. That's about commitments and so on. Again, is the relationship between what we're organizing around and how we manage in a particular direction. Does that help us do the work? And does how we do the work help that? Is that a healthy and productive relationship?
Yeah.
Between coordinating and organizing, is that a healthy relationship? Are we making commitments in a way that actually doesn't fit with how we coordinate? Are we do we have a very task-driven plan, but we are trying to manage feature by feature or something? I mean, that's slightly silly example, but you get these differences of structure and terminology between how we make our commitments and how we actually manage the work, and that's a problem. Is it any wonder that the organization, the people doing the work, the tracking systems, and most importantly, the customer, have a completely different idea of what progress we're making? It's those relationships are so often broken. We think we're making progress, we're busy, we're solving problems.
Oh, yeah.
The customer's no better off. Our
No.
tracking system says one thing, our planning system says another. That's common. I wouldn't say normal, but it is very common that people have a very different perceptions on what progress we're making. That is a solvable problem, but you solve that problem by making those relationships healthier and more productive.
Yep. Love it. Okay, so as we wrap this up, this has been rich and thoughtful. Love it. I learned a lot there. So if anybody's overwhelmed by complexity or just stuck in the weeds, I guess what's one small thing or shift in mindset or an action they could take or even try this week? Just thinking of our IT service provider space.
Yeah. Well, I'll make an even more focused version of something that I've said already. But what's the one thing I really want to finish? What's the one thing I can finish that I'm going to focus on? And you could enhance that by saying, and what trust will I build by doing it?
What's the one thing to finish this week that's going to really move the needle, and what trust to build with it?
Yes.
Get it done, and build trust.
Yes.
Love it. Okay, so where can people go to learn more about you, your books, your training, anything else you have?
So two main ways. If you go to agendashift.com/Mike, you can reach me via that. There's links to my books and stuff like that. So if you go to Amazon and search Wholehearted Mike Burrows, whether you're interested in the Wholehearted book or other books, you click on my name, and my author page I've got all my books. The 5 books that I've written in English and some translations as well. Which is cool. So there's several of my books have been translated into German. If you've got any German speakers in your audience, there's even a Russian translation of Kanban from the side. People believe it or not, so agendashift.com/Mike and search Wholehearted Mike Burrows on Amazon. One way or the other, you'll find me.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again for being here and sharing this. This has been very impactful, and looking forward to getting this out to our community.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
We'll talk again sometime.
Good.
Thank you.